Okay, today what I will try to briefly explain is when do video games stop being video games, and the point of doing that is basically to provide you with some possible concepts or methods or approaches to understanding a video game as a product of cultural existence, and by that to allow you to more directly, more precisely identify when you are, in a sense, when a game, more specifically video game, contains elements which should not belong to it if it is a game or if it is, in that sense, a manifestation of play. It's a bit of an anti-capitalistic, in that sense, lecture, but I think you understand why I'm talking about this. This is something that can be applied outside of the gaming industry, but I will use examples of video games to point out what is this all about. We have two phases. First is to at least at some point define some basic notions regarding the video games, regarding the play, the game, and all the other concepts that were mentioned by Professors Perušić and Perušić today. And then the second part will be examples and the explication of the theory I will present you, theory of practice. First things first, a bit different start, but I think you'll soon see why. Carl Schmitt, he was a German and philosopher, and one of the things he was very interested about was how to understand what is the political. And see, he already started. And he, in one of his studies dedicated to what is the political, he decided, or he came to an idea an idea was that there has to be some kind of basic distinction, some kind of basic relation which would allow us to understand a difference from something that is political and something that is either not political or is pseudo-political, appears to be political. And this distinction he based in his study, which is very interesting. This distinction he based on a difference between a friend and an enemy. Basically, as long as any group can establish this distinction, can establish this difference in identity, they can utilize the political, the core, the purpose or the meaning of the political as a human phenomenon to protect the group, that is to establish its legitimacy. And I always found this method of inquiry very interesting, very, I think, good way of trying to understand relations between phenomena. And so I tried basically to apply this to the case of games of play and video games in general. That is, what would be the distinction that the ludical would be based on. And if we can do that, then the structures behind these complex creations, which we call games, or more specifically in this lecture, video games, they can be more easily distinguished as truly having the identity a game, or in that sense, play. Now, first three things we need to understand is what will be the ludical, what will be the play, and what is a game. And ludical can be understood as a phrase referent to the manifestations of the core sets of properties and processes belonging to the nature of the fundamental agency of play. We already heard that today, the concept of the agency. We already heard that in two lectures, and this basically refer to all the possible manifestations and processes that will relate to something which we usually call as a play or a game. But as you've seen so far in the lectures that were presented, we continue on expanding the amount of what play could be understood as, or in what way a play could appear to be so manifested. In that sense, the broader notion would be the ludical. That is, in the same way in which we have a broad manifestation of what would be the political, from organizing your community to having parties to acting in a specific political way. So we also have the expansion of how playful appears, how gaming appears in that sense, and that could be called the ludical. Now, play is a fundamental agency of all known life forms that have developed cognitive states. I'm not sure about insects, but in the case of all life forms that basically have some kind of cognitive abilities, play is something that is ever present. So in that sense, we can say that all life forms fundamentally have play as their basic agency. And although it is complex, the play and its content that we've seen so far in the two lectures, the two plenary lectures that it is, it can be roughly understood as the agency of creative, joy-inducing exploration of possibilities and interactions through embodied simulations projected into factual space-time reality. Now, if you need an example of that, it's very simple. Consider when you're playing and when within the room of your room, or for example in your courtyard or in a club or in a bar, you envision some kind of role-playing game going on. In that sense, we basically create simulation and project it from our spectator's position into something that is basically a factual space-time reality. So there is not a ghost here, but I can play that it is. In that sense, I'm projecting simulation into a factual space-time reality. In a simple act of throwing and receiving this disk, what is actually going on is that the factual reality, everything that we are a part of, it collapses into a projected world. This is basically what's left of the world. And in this kind of simulated, collapsed variant of this world, I'm then exploring it creatively and expanding the understanding of what reality might be. I might not be aware that I'm doing that, but this is what is actually going on. So in a sense, this is a kind of almost existential mechanism which we as spectators, as those who project the play into occurrences, those who embody the play into existence, create. We create a specific type of world which in a sense leans on what already exists factually in the space-time reality, and then we expand this. Think of it as a tick ball which we can, or tick ball, for example, a rubber ball which we can expand. And then it expands by our playful interaction with the world, and in that expansion we realize what is possible and what is not, given the reality we were in. A famous play researcher, Brian Sutton Smith, a genius in that sense, he had I will skip this theory today because of the time limit, but he argued that basically playing can also be understood as a form of fighting against depression. In that sense, depression not only in this typical surface level way in which we are having some problems or do not understand where the problem of being depressed coming from, but in the sense of very existential meaning, in a sense of if we are creatures that would not play, we would immediately begin, in that sense, decaying, in a sense of decay. This could be considered in a sense of existential decay in both in the context of body decay and in the context of mind or spiritual decay. So the agency of acting in a sense of playing or gaming is related at some form to defeating the meaninglessness of the existence and at the same time exploring the possibilities of what could be. So in a sense, a play can be understood as the authentic spark of life, an exploration of existence that provides joy. Now, it could be, given the bioevolutionary mechanics, that it resulted in the creation of joy, but it could also be that joy was something that was attached to game and to play in order to expand the power of the possibility of playing in the context of the growth of life. And when this exploration of existence becomes ordered, when we create an order within this any kind of play, then we basically have a game. So game is an ordered play. Now, please do not make a mistake. Playing does not mean disorder. Playing is always some form of ordering, but what is happening here is this kind of ordering. We are basically sealing and turning it into something that is limited, something that has, in that sense, something that is catchable. In that sense, it has identity, and in that sense, a play becomes ordered through the establishment of a fixed code of behavior, objectives, and reasons. Since playing belongs to a more general biosystem, all life forms have it. And human playing can then be specifically called as defined as belonging to the specific anthroposystem within the biosystem. the ordering of play, the transformation of playing into a game, then restructures its presence within the anthroposystem into a subsystem of culture. And this is even rooted in the English word game. Game has some very old variants from which the word game came, evolved, developed, and have a meaning of communing. So you can play alone, but the game always means some kind of combining, social combining, and this means ordering, because between the two entities, social entities, the first thing that always establishes, or not necessarily social entities, but between two life form entities, the first thing that establishes is the way of how are we going to approach to each other. And as soon as we make contact, we are creating a way of behaving towards each other. And this basically means the creation of rules and fixed behavior. The ordering of playing into a game then means that we give it a structure and identity that can be now interacted with through other subsystems of an anthroposystem, or in that sense through other cultural systems within the human culture. When I play freely in that sense, I do not, you cannot do anything with that in that sense, but if I create a specific way of playing and tell you this is how you play this, then you can take it as a specific as something that has identity, that is fixed, that became a part of time-space reality, basically, then I can do something with that. This is why an ordered play may eventually become an organized play, or that is an organized game, and why an organized game can then become institutionalized. That means that becoming institutionalized, it turns it, the play or the ways of playing become element of a specific cultural tradition. And here's the example of the basketball. So ball playing is basically the level of play. Creation of basketball game is ordering a play into a specific game. Basketball competition is a form of organized game which was ordered through the fixation of ball playing aspects. And then we have the International Federation and the fusion of basketball into everyday life. The difference between playing and having the institutionalized, organized game is how we behave. If I am now playing with myself in some kind of way and I stop playing and go do something else, there is no reaction or correspondence to that except my own or those who were around it while the act was going on. However, the institutionalization of game means that we expect it as a traditional continuance. We expect that the basketball will continue on being and that people will participate as basketball players. The same cases with video games. The cultural movement of playing from an individualized agency towards institutionally governed production of performance, so watch the words, from individualized agency towards institutionally governed production of performance, blends then the ludic with the other types of agencies. Meaning that the ludic, which was originally part of this, is possibly subjected to motives different from those belonging to its nature. Schmidt argued that if the distinction gets somehow corrupted, I mentioned that, either by displacing the political to a sphere of activity that is moving it outside, or by, such as, for example, into the sphere of economics, or by integrating non-political elements into the political, its power collapses, the concept is void, and it makes the political group unable to gain its legitimacy, unable to defend itself. And Schmidt actually argued that at some point in the 20th century, 19th century, destroyed the way of free political activity was the introduction of economics into the political. You cannot properly govern nation in that sense if elements of economical are in the core of the political, because political does not function, is not related to the economical in that sense. Schmidt made distinction between friend and enemy. As long as I know, in the political sense, who is my friend and who is my enemy, I can retain and maintain my political legitimacy. I can understand and protect. I can understand my group, my political group, and I can protect it. So, what will be the distinction between friend and enemy? Now, consider that the theory I gave you here is somewhat in opposition to a lot of typical claims about in philosophy of game, in psychology of game, in theory of game in general. I will not go through all of them, but a lot of things are actually against in this approach to games. One of the things, for example, that play is purposeless in that sense, or that its purpose is autotelic. We heard that today. I think that it is not. First of all, I think that the play is not purposeless, that it never is purposeless, and the second, that it is also not autotelic. We do not play for the sake of the play. These are two. Then we have the case of voluntarily involvement in the game. I'm also skeptical about that, because in general, I'm not sure about the concept of free will, so I doubt also into the concept of voluntary interactivity, gameful, playful interactivity. These are some of the examples. Then there is also that the playing is undirected, unlike a game which has direction. This is also something that should be contested. I think play in that sense is never undirected. It appears so, but we just need to understand it better. Unlike this, somewhat controversial claims, this one is quite typical, and with this I agree with pretty much all the researchers on play. That is that we can actually make a distinction between, to understand the ludical, between having a player and a worker. And I'll try to show you how that works, how that plays out. So the true play will then be based on the distinction between playing and working. As long as I can understand what playing is, I can identify at what point the true play is going on, and at what point it becomes sort of working. But the ordering of play, this is what I mentioned, the creation of game, transformation of any kind of play into a game, locks basically the ludical agency into a cultural product. So ball playing is not a cultural product. Basketball is a cultural product. And in that sense, you gain identity, and you gain the characteristics, you get fixed behavior, you get fixed rules, and then you can collect it as an object and use it the way you want it. So as a product, as a piece of work, basically, a game can then be instrumentalized for any purpose pertaining to other types of agencies, such as politics, art, sport, religion, or economics. Following Schmidt then, if the distinction play-work gets somehow corrupted, either by displacing the game into some other sphere, for example economics, or by integrating non-ludic elements into the game, such as addiction stimulants, the power collapses of the concept, the barrier is breached, and the players are either unable to elevate ludically, which is basically when we are playing. The form of playing actually means a sort of elevation, or a kinesthetic elevation, in that sense, of mind kinesthetic, psychic or psychophysical elevation, or they are being exploited. So, examples. So, by the nature of their creation, all video games are products. They are not plays, they're not even games, that says they are first and foremost products. As a product, video games should be automatically considered as having more than a ludic element to their background. So when you receive a product which is a video game, you should not think of it as sort of childish playing that is contained within some specific form of some specific materialized form. But you should think of as, okay, this is something that ought to provide me playing, ought to provide me joy of playing it, but what else it is. And for the most cases, there is something else to it, and always has been. Since the beginning of video games in 40s and 50s and 60s, 70s, there was always some additional element related to why the game was even created. I can expand on that, of course. Because of the structural overlapping in the cultural system, a video game can also be a pseudo-ludical product. Now, somewhere perhaps I made a typo, perhaps somewhere I've written pseudo-logical. This is just a typo, it should always be pseudo-ludical product. What does it mean? A pseudo-ludical product is a product pretending to be a game, much like a pseudo-ludical behavior is a type of behavior in which a living being is pretending to play while their motives are outside of ludical agency. For example, I could present a game to a child, and play with the child, but what I'm actually doing is examining its intellectual capacities, for example. Or think of it when not necessarily you, but people tend to do that. They tend to see, especially children, what an animal is going to do if they provide them in a specific case, put them in a specific situation. If they put them on a tree, will they come down? We often project this as a play, and we do not even think that, for example, a cat or a dog would consider it, they could consider it a play. But what we are actually doing is that while playing with them, we are actually trying to see what's happening with them, and this is a pseudoludical act. A pseudoludical product may not be necessarily damaging to the player, but in both positive and negative cases, it most clearly was not made for playing's sake, or for playing sake exclusively. All instances of player exploitation, however, are the results of pseudoludical behavior and indicate either a pseudoludical product or a product with pseudoludical elements. Given the video game industry, the majority of video games with pseudoludical elements or being pseudoludical in itself exploit players. This is something that I think everyone who's interested in video games should really consider to its core. For example, The Stairway to Tax Cabin from 2017 is an example of, in principle, positive pseudoludical video game. If you haven't heard about Stairway to Tax Cabin, it came out after the Panama Papers, and it's basically trying to show you how you can evade, how rich people can evade tax restrictions or tax laws in order to gain richness, in order to escape, in order to evade the law which is trying to catch them. So basically it's showing you how to get away with being a thief. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is an example of a video game with in principle positive pseudological elements. It is very complex, and it was to a degree motivated to demonstrate and show what does it mean to have mental issues, what does it mean to be mentally, that is psychically challenged in that sense, not in the sense of deficiency, but in the sense of mental disorders. And the game, although it is a product, although it is selling, they implemented some elements which are not oriented towards being played in that sense. They oriented towards a sort of educational, towards educating people about what does it mean to be to have some form of mental disorder, or in that sense challenge. And in that sense, it can be considered as a positive pseudological. Is a game with positive pseudological elements. Now, Death Stranding is an example of a video game with, in principle, negative pseudological elements. One of the mechanics in Death Stranding includes the use of energy, which then kind of grants you positive effects of stamina, while in fact it is poorly marketing Monster Energy drink, which also can be quite devastating to your health. I should know. And then finally we have an example of Monster Legends from 2013 and going on, because of course it's mobile, is an example of a principal negative pseudological video game. Negative because, I will explain this a bit later, because in many its ways it is not actually a game. It does not actually tend to provide you good play. What it is trying to do is exploit your mental weaknesses and draw out as much as cash as possible. In addition, the seriousness of motives originating outside the ludical agency affects how strongly a product will be conditioned to influence or exploit the player. The stronger the aim to influence or exploit the player is, more prone will the creators be to apply force, to apply dishonesty, or induce negative emotions. For example, Monster Legends is an example of a game that indirectly lies to players and contains numerous mechanics that exploit players' humane weaknesses for the goal of profit. For example, it will tell you that the offer you are seeing is one-time only limited lifetime offer, and then it will repeat this continuously with every new player, and it will again offer this and again until it catches you to believe that it may be the last time you're seeing it, and then you buy it for no apparent reason. It also uses mechanics, for example, when you're walking through a specific maze, when the screen shifts and changes, it will rotate the elements. When you get back to a screen before, it will rotate elements, and based on your input of the finger, there is a high chance that you are going to spend your resources on something that you didn't intend to spend resources on, which then, when it builds up, forces you to try to get it back, but you cannot get it back because it is time limited, and you count how much time you need to actually get it back, so you buy it back as they continue to offer you more and more. There's a lot of other elements. I will not go into them, but this is basically a negative example of a video game, which is not, in fact, which is basically not a playful game. It is, in fact, a good economic business model exploiting the ludical of the life form which we are. And here is the example. I will play this on another PC because here it didn't work. So this is maybe you've seen this. This is the famous lecture which Jensen did, and this is kind of a normal practice. It will basically in a minute demonstrate you what does it mean to basically exploit the ludical, what does it mean to corrupt the ludical, which we were talking about.
This is a model from Dimitri Draman of Flare Games. It's a model for how people progress in a game. The hook is what gets you into the game to try out a free-to-play game. Then you build it into a habit that you play multiple sessions every day. And then at the end, it's the hobby phase where people see it as one of their main hobbies, and they put lots of time and resources into it. Now, if we look at this from a monetization perspective, the hook is where you put up an icebreaker. You want to give a really, really good deal, something that's a no-brainer. You would be crazy to turn it down as a player. The reason to give a really good deal up front is by making people spend up front, they are also emotionally committing to your game, their retention will go up. And the first spend is it breaks the ice, then they think of themselves as spenders in the game. It's okay for me to spend in the game. Lots of people otherwise have this wall up. I will never pay for a mobile game. So you need to break the wall first.
Okay, so this is just a brief demonstration that in the development of a video game there is often, I also experienced that during the development of the game which I was working on, we had this issue, and this problem. So this is systematically present in the video game industry, and a lot of people are trained to understand how to exploit humane weaknesses. Now, the effect which basically this has is that the players are more involved with working aspects during the play. So, for example, I had a case that made me laugh tragicomically, where one player of the Pokemon Go, she said she was catching a Pokemon, and she said, "Oh my God, I hope that this one will be the one that I want to catch. I'm so tired. I have to go home. I have to go work. I've already passed several courts, several local gym stations where she can catch the Pokemon. This is pure addiction. This is pure intent to simply collect the element that is missing without any kind of actual enjoyment. And the next thing that's happening is that we are basically not playing, but we're basically fighting against an economic business that is economic model or business model, and we are basically working against the developer, and the developer is basically working against us, trying to work us out and play us over in that sense. And instead of dealing with the implementation of the puzzle system, which is the core thing, what basically interests us in video game, or what makes a good video game or a great video game, instead of that, we are basically dealing with either a worldview, if the game is based on some political aspect, is trying to induce something political into you, or we are dealing with a business model, and in that sense it stops being the play. We are simply being victims of an exploitative system. Now, so when does a video game actually stop being a video game? Given the previous research and the thesis a video game is actually not a game. So it is not an ordered play. A video game is first of all a cultural product containing an interactive system designed to be utilized through ludicrous agency as a game. And at any point during which a player is conditioned within this product, within the interactive system designed to indulge in provided ludical agency by elements external to the ludical processes of a game, the video game stops being ludical, and the elements of its play should be reconsidered. So, in the case of this, any form of conditioned offer which is preventing you from progressing and requiring you basically to interact with the agency which is outside of ludical, actually it should be considered as an alarm for you as a person. It means that they are trying to, in a sense, they are trying to exploit your stupidity. And this is something that we should consider when we are playing video games, the fact that we can and are often known to be considered as stupid. When I was working on a focus group within the former Want to Play company, we were working on a children's game, which was also supposed to be a TV series and a lot of others. Basically a kind of, they were trying to mimic the model of Gormits and Pokemon, and when we were doing focus groups, they did not have quite good results with their focus groups. And at some point they just decided not to try to understand what the children want. They followed a model which is bombing the TV shows and a TV program with as much as possible commercials related to the specific product, and eventually it will kick off. The children will want to buy it, and it will start a franchise. And this is basically a very simple model. In the industry, it grew from having focus groups and trying to understand what would actually be good for the children and what would they buy. It grew into simply being completely bombed as soon as possible at the youngest that it could be in order to condition them into having this game, which basically means that they are not actually going for it because of the quality of the content. They are not playing with it because it is good induction of play. They are being conditioned to use this as a game. Did I pass the half hour? I did, yes, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So to finalize, also this is also the case. This is also the case with positive elements. So, for example, if you're creating an educational game, the elements of education, or if you're creating a political game or anything like that, if you're creating a game with a message, this basically means conditioning the player towards what is not actually a ludical agency. It means conditioning the player to interact with other aspects of human, or that is life form agencies, which are not related to the ludical. And in that sense, you can also detect, okay, this is a political game. And if you realize these elements are present, then you should consider this as pseudo-ludical. This can also work for example, the gamification of job office, or gamification of classroom, and so on. If it is pseudo-ludical, it means that it is basically exploiting the ludical. It means that the ludical will collapse, and it is not in that sense. It is not in your best interest. Thank you. I hope I was understandable.